Rancher saved Orphan girl from wolves. Her first word broke his heart. Clayton had not meant to ride out that far. The snow was falling thick and the light was dying fast, and a man with any sense would have turned back an hour ago. But sense was something he had lost along the way, somewhere between the death of his son and the years that followed. So he rode on, his horse moving slow through the drifts, the cold biting at his face like something angry. He saw the wolves first. 6 of them, maybe 7, circling something small in the clearing ahead. Their breath rose in white clouds. Their eyes were yellow and patient. Clayton pulled his rifle from the saddle and fired once into the air. The sound cracked across the valley like a bone breaking. The wolves scattered into the trees, silent as shadows. When he reached the spot where they had been, he saw her. A girl. Small. Maybe 6 years old, maybe younger. She was sitting in the snow with her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around them. Her dress was torn and dirty, too thin for winter. Her hair hung in dark tangles over her face. She did not move when he dismounted. She did not look up. She did not make a sound. Clayton stood there for a moment, the rifle still in his hands, watching her. He thought she might be dead, frozen. But then he saw her shoulders rise and fall, slow and steady, and he knew she was breathing. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded strange in the silence. Rough. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You hurt?" She did not answer, did not turn her head, just sat there, staring at nothing. He knelt down in the snow beside her, close enough to see the blue tint on her lips, the frost on her eyelashes, close enough to see that her feet were bare. He swore under his breath and shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her thin shoulders. She did not resist, did not help, just let him do it like a doll that had given up moving. "Where's your folks?" he asked. Nothing. He looked around the clearing. No tracks except the wolves and his own horse. No wagon, no bodies, no sign of anyone else. Just snow and trees and the wind that carried the cold deeper into his bones. He should leave her. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. A man alone had no business taking in a child, especially not one like this, silent and strange, and maybe broken beyond repair. But he thought of the wolves, how patient they had been, and he knew what would happen if he left her here. So he picked her up. She was lighter than he expected, like something hollowed out. She did not fight him, did not cry, just hung limp in his arms, her head resting against his chest, her eyes still open and staring at nothing. He set her on the front of his saddle and climbed up behind her, holding the reins with one hand and keeping her steady with the other. The ride back to his cabin took an hour. The whole time, she did not speak, did not shiver, did not move at all. The cabin was small and plain, built from logs he had cut himself years ago when things were different, when he still believed in futures. He carried the girl inside and set her down near the stove, where the heat was strongest. She sat where he placed her, her hands in her lap, her eyes still empty. He fed the fire until it roared. Then he found an old blanket and wrapped it around her, layering it over his coat. He filled the pot with snow and set it on the stove to melt. When the water was warm, he poured it into a cup and held it out to her. "Drink," he said. She stared at the cup, did not reach for it. He waited. Then he knelt down and brought the cup to her lips, tipping it gently. She drank. Slow, mechanical, like she was doing it because her body remembered how, not because she wanted to. When the cup was empty, he set it aside and studied her face. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her eyes were dark and deep, like wells that had no bottom. There was something in them that made his chest tighten, something old and sad and far away. "You got a name?" he asked. She blinked. Once, but she did not answer. He sighed and stood up, his knees aching from the cold. He went to the cupboard and found a can of beans, some hardtack, a piece of dried meat. He heated the beans in a pan and spooned them onto a tin plate. He set it in front of her with a fork. "Eat," he said. She looked at the plate. Then, slowly, she picked up the fork. Her hands were small and pale, the fingers thin as sticks. She ate without looking at him, without making a sound, each bite careful and slow. Clayton sat down at the table, and watched her. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. The silence between them was thick and heavy, like something alive. He had lived alone for 3 years now, and he had grown used to the quiet. But this was different. This was not the quiet of solitude. This was the quiet of absence, of something missing. When she finished eating, she set the fork down and folded her hands in her lap again. She did not look at him, did not nod or smile, or give any sign that she was grateful. Just sat there, staring at the floor. "You got folks out there somewhere?" he asked. "Someone looking for you?" "Nothing." "You lost?" "Scared." Still nothing. He rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. He was too old for this, too tired, too broken himself to fix someone else. But he could not send her back out into the snow. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. He stood up and moved to the small bed in the corner of the cabin. It was the only bed. He had not shared it with anyone since his son died. He pulled back the blanket and turned to her. "Come on," he said. "You need to sleep." She stood without a word and walked to the bed, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She climbed in and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling. Clayton dragged a chair close to the stove and sat down, the rifle resting across his lap. He did not know why. There was no danger here. But it felt wrong to sleep while she was awake. Wrong to close his eyes while hers stayed open. The fire burned low. The night stretched on, and in the silence, Clayton wondered if the girl would ever speak, or if whatever the wolves had taken from her was something she would never get back. He looked at her one last time before the exhaustion pulled him under. Her small shape beneath the blanket, her dark eyes still open, her silence like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking slowly out of sight. And he wondered, not for the first time that night, what kind of man saves a life he does not know how to keep. The girl did not speak on the second day, or the third, or the fourth. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, silent and pale, her bare feet whispering across the wooden floor. Clayton watched her from the corner of his eye while he worked, always aware of where she was, always listening for some sound that never came. On the fifth morning, while folding the blanket she had slept in, he noticed something stitched into the collar of her dress. He leaned closer, squinting at the faded thread. Letters. A name. Emma. He said aloud, testing the shape of it in his mouth. Emma. She looked up at him, just for a second. Then her eyes dropped back to the floor. It was not much, but it was something. He tried it again later, while scooping oatmeal into a bowl for her. Emma. That's you, right? She took the bowl without answering. But he saw the way her fingers tightened around it, just slightly, and he knew he was right. From then on, he used her name. Not often, not loudly, just enough to remind her that she still had one. She began to follow him. Not close, but close enough. When he went outside to check on the horses, she stood in the doorway, wrapped in his old coat, watching. When he chopped wood, she sat on the porch steps, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes tracking every swing of the axe. When he fed the chickens, she lingered near the fence, her head tilted to one side, like she was listening to something only she could hear. He did not mind it. In fact, he found himself explaining things to her, even though she never asked. He told her the names of the horses, Buck and Sally, and showed her how to measure out their grain. He pointed to the hen house and explained which birds laid the best eggs. He taught her how to stack wood so it would not fall, how to pump water from the well without straining her arms. She never nodded, never smiled, but she learned. He could see it in the way she moved, how she began to anticipate what he needed before he asked for it, how she carried the water bucket with both hands, careful not to spill, how she scattered the chicken feed in slow, even circles, just like he had shown her. One afternoon, he brought an apple in from the root cellar. It was one of the last ones, wrinkled and soft, but still good enough to eat. He set it on the table and pulled out his knife, the blade worn smooth from years of use. "Come here," he said. Emma approached slowly, her eyes on the apple. He cut a slice and held it out to her. She took it and ate it without a word, her small teeth biting into the pale flesh. "You ever peel one of these?" he asked. She shook her head. It was the first time she had answered a question, even without speaking. He handed her the knife, handle first. Hold it like this. Not too tight. Let the blade do the work. She took the knife carefully, her fingers small against the worn wood handle. He guided her hand, showing her how to angle the blade, how to turn the apple so the peel came off in one long curl. Her hands were shaking, but she kept going, slow and careful, her tongue pressed between her lips in concentration. When she finished, the peel lay on the table in a rough spiral, and the apple sat naked and white in her palm. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that was not emptiness. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Pride. Good, he said quietly. That's real good, Emma. She set the knife down and ate the apple in silence, piece by piece, until it was gone. That night, Clayton built the fire higher than usual. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters, and the cold was seeping through the cracks in the walls. Emma sat on the floor near the hearth, her knees pulled up to her chest, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The firelight danced across her face, turning her skin gold and shadow. She stared into the flames without blinking. Clayton sat in his chair, his boots unlaced, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He watched her watch the fire, and something about the way she looked, so small, so still, made his chest ache. You remember anything? He asked. About before? She did not answer, did not move, just kept staring. He tried again, softer this time. You got family somewhere? Someone who might be looking for you? Still nothing. He sighed and took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter and old, but it was warm, and that was enough. The fire crackled. A log shifted and sent up a spray of sparks. Emma flinched, just barely, and Clayton saw her hands tighten around her knees. Her breathing changed, faster, shallower. Her eyes were wide and fixed on the flames, like she was seeing something else, something he could not see. He set his cup down and leaned forward. Emma. She did not hear him. She was somewhere else now, somewhere far away and dark. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her whole body was rigid, like she was bracing for something. Clayton stood and moved closer, kneeling down beside her. Hey, he said gently. It's all right. You're safe. She blinked. Once. Twice. And then the spell broke. She turned her head and looked at him, her eyes wet and glassy in the firelight. She did not cry, but he could see the tears there, held back by sheer will. He did not know what to do. He was not good with comfort, had never been, even when his son was alive. But he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, awkward and uncertain. You're safe, he said again. Whatever it was, it's gone now. She looked down at her knees and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Clayton stayed there for a moment longer, then stood and returned to his chair. He did not ask any more questions. The days began to blur together after that. Emma followed him through the routines of survival, feeding, mending, chopping, hauling. She learned how to milk the goat without spilling, how to knead dough for bread, how to sew a button back onto a shirt. She never spoke, but she was there, always there, a quiet presence that filled the cabin in ways Clayton had not expected. He began to feel responsible for her, not because she asked him to, not because anyone told him he had to, but because she had no one else, because the wolves had not taken her, and that meant something. It had to. At night, he lay awake in his chair, listening to her breathe in the bed across the room. He thought about his son, about the way he had failed him, about the guilt that still lived in his chest like a splinter he could not pull free. And he wondered if saving this girl, this small, broken, silent thing, might be the closest he would ever come to making it right. But he did not say any of that aloud. He just kept teaching her, kept feeding her, kept the fire burning through the long, cold nights. And in the silence between them, something began to grow. Not love, not yet, but something quieter, something like duty, like purpose, like hope, though neither of them would have called it that. One evening, as the snow fell soft against the windows and Emma sat by the fire with her hands folded in her lap, Clayton realized he had stopped wondering when she would leave. He had stopped imagining the day someone would come to claim her. because somewhere along the way, without him noticing, she had become his to protect. And that scared him more than the wolves ever had. The storm came on a Tuesday, though Clayton had long since stopped keeping track of days. He saw it building in the western sky that morning, a wall of gray so thick it looked solid, like something you could touch. The wind picked up before noon, sharp and cold, carrying the smell of snow and iron. He brought in extra wood, filled every bucket and pot with water from the well, checked the animals twice, making sure they had enough feed to last. Emma helped without being asked, carrying armfuls of kindling, her small face serious and focused. By evening, the snow was falling sideways, driven by wind that howled like something alive and angry. Clayton bolted the shutters and fed the fire until it roared. The cabin shook with each gust, the walls groaning under the weight of the wind. He hung blankets over the door and windows, tried to keep the cold from seeping through the cracks. They ate a simple meal, beans and cornbread, and when they were finished, Clayton pulled his chair closer to the fire. Emma sat on the floor beside him, wrapped in her blanket, her eyes reflecting the flames. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, they barely spoke. Clayton whittled a piece of wood into the shape of a horse, his knife moving slow and careful. Emma watched his hands, her head tilted to one side, following each stroke of the blade. When he finished, he held it out to her. She took it and ran her fingers over the smooth wood, tracing the carved mane, the small ears, the legs frozen in mid-gallop. She did not smile, but she held it close, and that was enough. On the second day, the wind grew stronger. It screamed around the cabin like something trying to get in, rattling the shutters, tearing at the roof. The fire was the only sound inside, crackling and snapping, a small defiance against the cold. Clayton sat in his chair, staring at the flames, his mind drifting to places he usually kept locked away. He thought about his son, about the boy's laugh, bright and easy like water over stones, about the way he used to sit right where Emma was sitting now, his eyes wide with wonder at every story Clayton told. He glanced down at Emma. She was holding the wooden horse, turning it over in her hands, her expression unreadable. "I had a boy once," Clayton said. The words came out before he could stop them, rough and low. "About your age, maybe a little older." Emma looked up at him. She did not speak, but she was listening. He cleared his throat and continued, his voice quiet beneath the roar of the storm. "His name was Thomas. Tommy, we called him. He was good, better than me, better than I deserved." The fire crackled. The wind howled. Clayton stared into the flames, seeing things that were no longer there. "He got sick," he said. "Fever came on fast. I rode to town for the doctor, but the snow was bad that year. Took me 2 days to get there and back. By the time we returned," he stopped, the words catching in his throat like something sharp. "By the time we returned, he was gone." Emma's fingers tightened around the wooden horse. "I should have been faster," Clayton said. "Should have left sooner. Should have done something different. But I didn't. And now He trailed off, shaking his head. "He's gone, and I'm still here." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on them like the weight of the snow on the roof. Clayton rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly exhausted. He had not said those words aloud in 3 years, had not let himself think them, let alone speak them. But Emma had a way of pulling things out of him. Her silence was not empty. It was listening, and somehow that made it easier. His mother left before that, he continued, softer now. Couldn't take the loneliness out here. Can't say I blame her. This life, it takes more than it gives. He paused, then looked down at Emma. But Tommy stayed. He was strong, stronger than both of us. Emma stared at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then, slowly, she set the wooden horse down on the floor between them. She placed it carefully, like it was something precious, something sacred. Clayton did not know what it meant, but he felt something shift in the air between them, something unspoken and fragile. On the third day, the storm began to ease. The wind died down to a low moan, and the snow fell softer, gentler. Clayton slept in his chair that night, his chin resting on his chest, his arms crossed over his stomach. The fire had burned low, glowing red and quiet. He woke to the sound of his name. Not his name, his son's name. Tommy. It was barely a whisper, so soft he thought he had dreamed it. But then he heard it again, coming from the direction of the bed. Tommy. Clayton's eyes snapped open. His heart was pounding, his breath caught in his chest. He turned his head slowly, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. Emma was sitting up in the bed, her small shape outlined by the dim glow of the fire. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her lips moved, forming the word again. Tommy. Clayton stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. He crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside the bed, his face level with hers. Emma, he said, his voice shaking. What did you say? She blinked, and her eyes focused on him. For a moment, she looked confused, like she did not know where she was. Then her expression went blank again, that familiar wall sliding back into place. You said his name, Clayton said, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. You said Tommy. How do you know that name? She did not answer, just stared at him with those deep, dark eyes. Emma, please, he said, and he hated the desperation in his voice. What do you know my son's name? She opened her mouth, but closed it, opened it again, and then, in a voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear, she spoke. He found me. The words hung in the air between them, impossibly heavy. Clayton felt something crack inside his chest. What? He found me, she said again, her voice thin and fragile, like glass about to break. In the woods. When I was lost. He gave me food, told me to wait, said he'd come back. Clayton could not breathe, could not think. The room was spinning, the firelight blurring at the edges of his vision. When? He asked hoarsely. When did he find you? Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they did not fall. Before the snow, she whispered. Before he. She did not finish. She did not have to. Clayton sank back onto his heels, his hands falling to his sides. He saw it now, all of it, the pieces falling into place like cards laid out on a table. Tommy, riding out into the storm, not for the doctor, but for something else. Someone else. A little girl, lost and alone. And then the fever, sudden and cruel, taking him before he could finish what he had started. He told me his name, Emma said, so quietly Clayton almost missed it. He told me to remember it. In case I needed help. In case I got scared. Clayton's vision blurred. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to hold himself together. But the grief was too big, too old, and it came pouring out of him in a way it never had before. Tommy had been trying to save her, and he had died trying. And now, 3 years later, Clayton had found her in the snow, surrounded by wolves, right where his son must have left her. It was not chance. It had never been chance. Emma reached out and touched his hand, her small fingers cold and light as feathers. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Clayton looked up at her through the blur of tears and saw, for the first time, not just a lost girl, but the last thing his son had tried to protect. The last piece of him still left in the world. And he understood, finally, why he had been the one to find her. The snow began to melt in late March. It came slowly at first, water dripping from the eaves, small patches of brown earth appearing in the yard like wounds opening in white skin. Then faster, the drifts collapsing into themselves, the ground turning soft and muddy, the air warming day by day until you could smell the earth waking up. Clayton stood on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise over the valley, and felt something shift inside him. Winter was ending. The hard part was over. They had made it through. Emma came out and stood beside him, the wooden horse clutched in one hand. She had not let go of it since the night she spoke his son's name. She looked out at the melting snow, her eyes squinting against the light, and for the first time since he had found her, she looked like a child. Just a child. Spring's coming, Clayton said. She nodded. It was small, but it was there. Over the next few weeks, Clayton began to ask her questions. Gentle ones, careful ones. He did not push, but he needed to understand. Needed to know how his son's story ended, even if it hurt. They were sitting by the creek one afternoon, watching the water rush over the stones, when he asked her about her mother. Tommy told me about a woman, he said quietly. Said he met her in town. Said she had dark hair and a kind smile. Was that your mother? Emma picked up a small stone and dropped it into the water. She watched the ripples spread, slow and even, before she answered. Yes, she said. Her voice was still soft, still fragile, but it was there. Her name was Sarah. Clayton felt his chest tighten. He had heard Tommy mention that name once, years ago, but he had not thought much of it at the time. Boys fell in love. It was what they did. What happened to her? He asked. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she died. When I was born. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Clayton's throat ache. Tommy tried to take care of me, Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. After she died, he came to the house where we lived. Brought me food, held me when I cried. She paused, her small hands twisting in her lap. But then he got sick, and he didn't come back. Clayton closed his eyes. He could see it now, his son, barely more than a boy himself, trying to care for an infant he barely knew. Riding out in the cold, bringing what little he could, doing his best to fill a hole that could never be filled. And then the fever, the snow, the desperate ride to town that came too late. Tommy had not been running an errand that day. He had been trying to save a life. 2 lives, maybe his own and Emma's. How did you survive? Clayton asked, his voice rough. Emma shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. People gave me things sometimes. Food, blankets. I slept in barns, under porches. I walked a lot. She looked down at her hands. I forgot how to talk. I think I forgot a lot of things. Clayton felt something break inside him, something that had been holding together for too long. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, and this time, she did not pull away. You're safe now, he said. You don't have to walk anymore. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. You're not going to leave me? No, he said, and he meant it. I'm not going to leave you. The days grew longer. The grass turned green. Wildflowers appeared in the meadow, small bursts of yellow and purple against the brown earth. Clayton planted a garden, and Emma helped him, her small hands pressing seeds into the soil, patting the dirt down gently like she was tucking them into sleep. They fell into a rhythm, the two of them. He taught her how to ride Buck, the old horse patient and steady beneath her. He showed her how to fish in the creek, how to bait a hook, how to wait for the tug on the line. She learned how to bake bread, how to churn butter, how to mend a torn shirt with needle and thread. She spoke more now. Not a lot, but enough. She asked questions about the animals, about the weather, about the tools in the shed. She told him small things, how the chickens liked her better than they liked him, how the creek sounded different in the morning than it did at night. And sometimes, when the evening light was soft and golden, she would sit beside him on the porch and ask about Tommy. Clayton told her everything he could remember. The way Tommy used to climb trees and refuse to come down. The way he laughed at his own jokes, even when no one else did. The way he loved horses and hated carrots, and could fix almost anything with his hands. Emma listened to every word, her eyes wide and hungry, like she was gathering pieces of a person she had barely known. And in a way, Clayton realized she was. She was building a picture of the boy who had tried to save her. The boy who had, in the end, brought her to the one person who could finish what he started. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky red and orange, Emma turned to him and said, "Do you think he would have liked me?" Clayton felt his heart twist. He did like you, Emma. That's why he tried so hard. But if he was still here, she said, Do you think he would have wanted me to stay? Clayton looked at her, this small, brave girl who had survived more than any child should have to. This girl who carried his son's last act of kindness in her bones. Yes, he said. I think that's exactly what he would have wanted. Emma nodded slowly, and something in her face softened. Something that had been tight and scared for so long finally began to relax. Then I'll stay, she said quietly. If you want me to. I want you to, Clayton said, and he was surprised by how much he meant it. I want you to stay. She leaned against him then, her head resting on his arm, and they sat together in the fading light, watching the stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Clayton thought about his son, about the guilt he had carried for 3 years, the weight of it pressing down on him like stone. He had thought saving Emma might ease that weight, might make up for what he had failed to do. But he understood now that it was not about making up for anything. It was not about erasing the past or fixing what was broken. It was about continuing what Tommy had started, about honoring the boy's last act of love by giving it a future. Emma was not a replacement for his son. She was not a second chance. She was something else entirely, something new and fragile and real. She was a promise kept. Spring turned the valley green and soft, and life began to grow again in places that had been frozen and dead. The garden sprouted. The foals were born. The days stretched longer, and the nights grew warm. And in the small cabin at the edge of the valley, a man and a girl learned how to live together, how to talk and listen, how to grieve and heal, how to take the broken pieces of their lives and build something that, while not whole, was enough. One morning, as they fed the horses together, Emma looked up at Clayton and said, "Can I call you something?" He paused, his hand on Buck's mane. "What do you mean?" "A name," she said. Something other than Clayton. He looked down at her, at the hopeful uncertainty in her eyes, and felt something warm and painful bloom in his chest. "What do you want to call me?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "Papa." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and heavy all at once. Clayton felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes, but he did not look away. He knelt down in the dirt beside her, this small girl who had walked through wolves and winter and loneliness, and he nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice breaking just a little. "Yeah, you can call me that." Emma smiled then. It was small and shy and uncertain, but it was real. The first smile he had ever seen on her face. And Clayton understood, finally, that some things were not lost. Some things could be found again, even after the longest winter, even after the deepest grief. Some things, if you were lucky, came back to you in forms you never expected and taught you how to live again.